everybody. My name is Sue Wilder, and I'm with the Coalition of Refuge Friends and Advocates. I would like to welcome you today to the webinar. Our monthly webinar today is about the fine differences between friends and volunteers, and we have a great team of speakers ahead of us, and they'll introduce themselves in just a minute. Before we do that, I would like to acknowledge a few folks that are with us today from the Refuge Association as well as Corfa. We have Marco here, who is our communications. No, Marco, help me out there.
Okay, I don't know my title either, but I think they call me Chief Operating Officer.
Thank you. Okay, and then we have our technical wizard, Eden Taylor from the Refuge Association, who will be behind the scenes making everything work for us smoothly. From Corfa, I see Cheryl Hart is here, and I just want to let her come in for a minute and say hi.
Hi, everybody. Just a couple of reminders. Please go to the chat and enter your name and what friends group you're with so that we know who you are and where you're from. And also, you'll see some messages popping up in the chat in just a moment about how you can become more involved with Corfa and NWRA and information that you can pass on to other people in your friends group who maybe don't know about us yet. We'd really appreciate you doing that.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl. And so with very little ado, I'll just remind you all that next month, we have a webinar. It will be about beyond diversity, about changing cultures and systems. And it will be given by Ashley Ann Perez Rivera from the Fish and Wildlife Service. It should be a great webinar about diversity. We're really looking forward to that. That will be on December 13th at 2 p.m. Today's webinar will allow 90 minutes, so we'll be here for 90 minutes, and we're really looking forward to this talk. I know a lot of folks ask questions about friends and refuge volunteers, and so without any more pause, we will turn it over to Jackie so she can begin the webinar.
Well, thank you, and thanks to all of you for joining us today to learn about, or more about, the subtle differences between friends and volunteers and juggling the hats that we sometimes all are switching between. So throughout the presentation, we're going to focus on some of those similarities and some of the differences between friends and volunteers. So before we start, I just want to introduce my co-presenters. First of all, we have Helen Strakwajan. Helen is from Alaska, and she is the regional coordinator for the Friends and Volunteer Program there. And then Sue Hicks is from the Friends of Sherburne in Minnesota, which is Region 3. And my name is Jackie Jacobson, and I am the Regional Friends and Volunteer Coordinator in the Mountain Prairie region, Region 6. So the way we'd like to do things today is Helen is going to be monitoring the chat very closely and answering any questions in the chat that she can take care of while we're presenting. But we'll also pause on occasion. Sue and I will be presenting. We'll pause every so often, and we'll take questions out loud or from the chat that we still need to clarify. So feel free to ask questions at that point, and we'll try to get them answered. The objectives for this presentation, there's 5 of them. We first want to be able to define friend and define service volunteer. So those would be the Fish and Wildlife Services definitions of those two. Secondly, we want to recognize the similarities that might exist when you're operating as a friend or as a volunteer. And then in reverse, we also want to identify what some of the differences are between the friends and the volunteers. We'll just learn a little bit about what service policies and agreements guide each of these programs. And in the end, we want to make sure that you know who you can contact for more resources specific questions that you have about the program. You all have somebody in your region who is expert on both of those programs. Similarities and differences. Did somebody say something? Okay, so there's times when you're going to be wearing a Friends hat, depending on what capacity you're acting in. There's sometimes you're going to be wearing a service hat, volunteer hat. Just depends on who you are and what programs you're working with. So when you registered for this webinar, you should have received, it's a matrix that has a list of activities. And then there are columns to check off, hey, can a volunteer do this? Can a friend do this? Can I do this as a service employee? So if you didn't get that ahead of time, Helen is going to drop it in the chat if she hasn't already, and you can pick it up there and take a peek at it when you have a few moments.
Okay, so what the heck is a Friends organization? We get that question frequently enough around our refuge. Well, this is something that the Fish and Wildlife Service defines as an independent organization, and we have a formal agreement with them, the Friends Partnership Agreement. Normally, community volunteers or refuge lovers will form a Friends organization, and they get the 501c3 tax exempt status through the IRS. That's one of the requirements to have the partnership agreement. And the purpose or mission of Friends organizations is to carry out or help to carry out the objectives of the service site or program that they're affiliated with. So people say it in different ways, but that's the bottom line. Now, the Friends can participate in some activities that can't be done by service volunteers. And examples of those are lobbying, soliciting donations, administering games of chance, and operating their organization, their meetings, their taking minutes, all the business of being friends. The confusing thing is that most friends are really eager supporters of their refuge or hatchery, and at that point, they are working as service volunteers. The Friends activities, we can do our own sorts of activities. Here in this photo, it's some of our Friends volunteers helping out at, I think it was our 25th birthday party. So our activities, other activities that we, and I'm sure a lot of you do too, we promote our site and the surrounding area. There isn't a marketing person at our refuge, so the Friends help with that, as well as service volunteers. And of course, the Friends can serve on the Friends board or Friends committees, and we can work at our nature store, and we can host fundraising and other events particular to the Friends. And of course, one big part of it is networking to recruit new friends, which often ends up in recruiting refuge volunteers. And finally, we can advocate or actually lobby with decision makers, especially those in DC.
A little bit more to add on to what Sue has told you about that Friends about the program is that the program is actually guided by Fish and Wildlife Service policy. So there are 4 chapters of policy. One talks about how the service staff can work with Friends organizations. The second chapter is about finance and administration through Friends agreements. The third chapter actually focuses on the all-important Friends partnership agreement. And then the 4th chapter talks about nature stores and other revenue generating activities, fundraising. So those are the 4 chapters that if you're a service employee that you want to be quite familiar with if you're working with a Friends group, and also familiarize your friends with those. So the Friends actually partner with the service through that formal agreement, a signed Friends Partnership Agreement. And that really just describes the scope of your partnership. So if you are doing things like, say the Friends are using service office space, or they're using service equipment to do certain things in support of the mission, there's also a second piece to that agreement called a supplemental agreement, where you describe how the Friends can use and why they can use that equipment or be on service lands to do certain things. Beyond that, there are some Friends groups who do an awful lot of fundraising. And if they're doing fundraising in support, the fundraising they do is in support of that service site and the mission of the partnership. And they may also have a fundraising agreement attached to that partnership agreement. And that's needed when the Friends are going to raise money. They're going to generate revenue for of at least $25,000 or more for a specific project. So if one project that they're working on or one program is they're going to raise more than $25,000 for it, then they need a fundraising agreement that the service also is part of. In all, once those 1 or 2 or 3 items are stapled together, we also want to attach other things like the bylaws and the Secretary of State, the Articles of Incorporation, insurance policies, the IRS determination letter that says that, yes, indeed, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And overall, that package of material is good for 5 years. It's valid for 5 years. But it's good to kind of be looking at those things annually to make sure that, hey, we didn't think we needed a fundraising agreement last year, but hey, now we do because we decided on this new project. So it kind of keeps you looking at things fresh in your mind, and it gives you the opportunity to not wait 5 years to put those things in when you're renewing it, but to make a modification annually. You can do that once a year. Anything new you've come up with, it's a real simple 1-pager. So moving on to the service volunteer program, a volunteer is actually defined as an individual or a group of people who perform service without promise, expectation, or receipt of compensation for their services. So in order to be a service volunteer, you've got to meet certain eligibility requirements. Number one, you need to sign a volunteer service agreement before you start any work at your hatchery or at your refuge. Other eligibility requirements might be, you might need some special training to do something that you're going to help with at your hatchery or refuge. Or you might need to meet a minimum age requirement, such as if you're going to operate a government vehicle, you need to be at least age 18 and have a state driver's license. Or if you're going to operate like a larger truck that requires a commercial driver's license, then you need to be 21. So there's a few things to be aware of, and your service person should be up on those things. So we've got the volunteer service agreement. We call it the form OF 301A, and then there's a form 301B, which is for a group of volunteers. And just like the Friends, there's certain policies. There's 3 chapters of policy that guide the volunteer program. The first one is policy, procedures, and responsibilities for volunteers. The second one talks about eligibility. And then the third one talks about the operations of the volunteer program. And I think one of the most important things probably that I'll say on this call today is this. You want to be careful, service staff want to be careful. You want to take care of your volunteers. And volunteers also want to ensure that they're really doing what's only written in the scope of their duties or their description of duties and what hours and days they work. on their volunteer service agreement. And the reason that that's so important is if a volunteer, and those volunteers are so good-hearted and they do a lot of extra, but let's say that their volunteer service agreement says that they work on delivering educational programs, visiting with the public, Monday through Friday from 8 to 5 o'clock. And that volunteer, all of a sudden, thinks, oh goodness, we got lots of snow today. I'm going to go out here at 10 p.m. on Saturday night, and I'm going to start shoveling snow. If that volunteer is injured, shoveling snow, they may not be covered for their injuries because it doesn't say in their description of work that they're responsible for shoveling snow on Saturday night at 10 o'clock. So be really careful and very inclusive of everything that your volunteers will be doing, because we want the Federal Employee Compensation Act to take care of our volunteers, just like service staff are taken care of if we're injured while working in the scope of our duties. The other thing that can happen with a volunteer is if the volunteer is working out on a trail, they accidentally leave a shovel laying across the trail, a visitor comes along and trips on it, that visitor could file a tort claim. So we want to ensure that, yes, the volunteer is supposed to be working on the trail because we want the Federal Tort Claims Act to cover our volunteers that are working within the scope of their duty. So just something to be really cognizant about.
Thank you, Jackie. And of course, volunteers and friends don't get paid for helping out at the refuge, but we may not be worth our weight in gold, but we are certainly valuable. I know in the past couple of years, I've read that like 20% of the refuge work or work performed on refuges is done by volunteers. So just looking at the dollars involved here. I think about a year ago, we figured there were 172 Friends organizations and pushing 19,000 volunteers and like almost 930,000 hours contributed. So $26.5 million of contributed time, the equivalent of 446 full-time employees, especially with the current employment situation, staffing at refuges and hatcheries. That is really something. And we know we're appreciated. Okay, so there are similarities between Friends and service volunteers. Obviously, we care about the site that we are supporting. We can all do community outreach. We can all help with nature education. We can greet visitors at the front desk and help at events. We'll talk more about this later, but in some of those cases, you may be a friend, but actually acting as a service volunteer when you do those things. And either friends or service volunteers can have office space at their service site. Differences, again, to emphasize, only friends can administer their organization. That is, serve on the board, serve on a committee, be the treasurer and do the financials, rewrite your bylaws. Only the friends can fundraise and lobby for their site, and only service workers or volunteers can conduct work at their station. Well, lots of reasons to be a friend as far as I'm concerned. For a small fee, in our case, we have asked for a small donation to be considered a member. Then we get 10% off at our nature store and regular newsletters, either e-news or paper newsletters. And when you're a friend, sometimes there are special tours or programs that are available to you. And of course, we can advocate or lobby, as in the photo here, we had Senator Smith, and she was all ready to go birding and very supportive, makes you feel good, and we hope they remember us. I think she will. But above all, if you feel very much appreciated, and the time you spend is well worth it. You learn a lot working with the service staff.
There's also a lot of benefits associated with being a service volunteer. So first, you know, we want our volunteers to know that their efforts are very much needed, they're appreciated, and they are making a difference in the hatchery system or in the refuge system, because like Sue said, the employees there's not enough employees to get all the work done. So volunteers have a lot of opportunities to use their skills in new ways, and with new people. They also get the chance to learn about a hatchery or a national wildlife refuge, spend time in nature, get those behind the gates tours and experiences. And there's even, you know, a cadre of volunteers, our RV volunteers, who come and oftentimes park their RV on a service RV pad and stay for the summer or the spring, 3-4 months. And while they're doing that, you know, maybe they're volunteering 20 hours a week, 30 hours a week. And in their off time, they're actually going out and kind of exploring and discovering the state or the adjacent states. So a lot of travel experience for folks as well. With that, we just want to pause and ask Helen if there's any questions in the chat that we should acknowledge now. And after that, we'll follow it up with asking for anybody to unmute and ask questions.
Well, Jackie, no questions. I mean, I think probably people are reading the policy that I dropped into the chat. I think that was probably distracting, but no questions. So yeah, if you have a question, come off mute and oh, Sue's gonna ask a question. Sue Wilder, that is. The service volunteer form has expiration dates. Yes.
Yep.
The volunteer service agreement form does have an expiration date. So once you sign up a volunteer, that form is valid for 1 year. And at that time, it needs to be renewed if the volunteer is going to stay on, which really means, I mean, in some cases people talk, well, can we just initial it? But really what should happen is that you should work with your volunteer. You should complete a new volunteer service agreement. And that kind of makes you think through this volunteer's duties, what their hours and days should be. Do they have all the training they need? Have you gone over all the job hazard analyses that you should be going over to make sure that they're working safely? So yes, 1 year is what's valid on one of those forms.
And for service staff, just FYI, you keep those forms for 3 years and then you can shred them. So just for service staff only, you may want to know that. How long do you have to keep them? Let's see, we have another question. Only friends can work the nature shop and use the register. Question. Yes.
Right.
Anything else you want to say about that, Jackie?
I would just add on that a nature store is considered nonprofit organization business. It's not the business of the hatchery or the refuge. And that's why the service staff and the service volunteers should not be doing things in the nature store, because just like writing bylaws or filing articles with the Secretary of State or running the social media, that's all Friends group business.
And not to muddy the waters, but I did see some Alaska folks online. Remember, our bookstores are not run by a Friends organization, so the rules for working at a cooperating association bookstore are different. So if for some reason, again, I'm not trying to muddy the waters for everybody else out there, but just don't want you guys to start freaking out like, oh, like my ranger's been ringing up stuff. We have a different situation up here in Alaska, so just so you know. Okay, let's see what else we have. Are there any considerations for extending that to 2 to 3 years. Are you talking about the volunteer services agreement? HP?
Yeah, it looked like it. That's when the question came up.
Okay, yeah, so again, like Jackie said, every year just go back in and redo the form. It's only a 2-pager, a front and back. And again, look at those duties. And so that's why we want to look at it annually so that we make sure everything's clear, up to date, times, places, dates, all those sort of things. Yes, yes, Kenai folks, there's always a difference in Alaska. And it looks like Tracy has a hand up. Would you like to come off mute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. So we have an annual event here, well, off-site, not here at the Refuge, that our Friends group leads each year. And the Refuge has been involved on and off. Sometimes staff are there just helping with logistics. They're on site running tables and supporting the event. And the Friends group always recruits Refuge volunteers to help at that event. So there's been a little confusion about do those volunteers working at the offsite event hosted by the Friends group gain volunteer hours? And if there's an injury, would they be under the Refuge Workman's Comp Act, or because it's a Friends hosted event, are they responsible and liable for injuries?
So I can take a stab at answering your question. So it's really important up front when you're working with your Friends partnership agreement to determine what exactly are Friends hosted events, which ones, which are Refuge hosted events, where the Friends are maybe helping, but we're calling them sponsors instead of making them hosts and responsible for it. So I would say that if it is a Friends owned, Friends hosted event that's going on, and you know that you know some of those Refuge volunteers and you think that, oh, they'd like to come and help us, you have the opportunity at that point to sign them up as Friends volunteers, making them, part of your organization. Anything that happens at a Friends hosted event, and I think you said this one was offsite, is the responsibility of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So
I would agree with that also. When our group just a couple of times has sponsored or hosted a Friends only event, and one of the cases was at the Refuge. The other case was a fundraiser at a local restaurant, and we got our own volunteers and we did provide insurance just for that day.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to talk about Rob's ask a question now.
I'm sorry, Rich, I didn't catch that.
Oh, I have some trouble with audio. I'm going to make a meeting and I'll be back in just a few seconds.
Or maybe write it in the chat.
Too long, too difficult to put it in words.
It sounded like Rich was going to go out and maybe come back in. Any other questions?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
My name is Donovan Garcia. I'm with the Friends of Bayou Teche National Wildlife Refuge in Louisiana. My question is, all of these agreements, all of these, whether it's a partnership agreement or a volunteer agreement or a Friends agreement between friends, when are these agreements? If you're signing them up for a year, 2 years, 3 years, legally, who determines what when something happens? Because if you're signed in as a volunteer, but you're working as a friend or doing something for the Friends group on the refuge, who determines what and when?
So those things should be like very cut and dried in the Friends Partnership Agreement. So in your Friends
But-
Partnership Agreement, if the Friends are responsible for something, it should list, okay, the Friends are hosting the Shorebird Festival, the 5K run, and the fishing derby. That means you're taking responsibility for the people that are working that event for you. So,
But- But we were told we could not alter that agreement in any way.
so
That's
there's,
why we did not sign it. We did not sign the partnership agreement because we were told that we could not make changes to it in any kind of way.
so the Friends Partnership Agreement is necessary to actually be considered an official Friends group.
That's
So
correct.
if you don't have a Friends Partnership Agreement in place, then the Fish and Wildlife Service can't consider you as one of the official Friends groups.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But when we signed that agreement, if we sign that agreement, we're putting our Friends members at risk because what's in that agreement is a contract. And when you sign that contract, they can use that contract against you in a court of law.
Well, then the Friends better get insurance for Friends only activities.
I can do that, but it does not cover us if we sign the Friends agreement. The insurance
Why
company will
wouldn't
not.
it? Why wouldn't it? Because if you are, if you sign that partnership agreement, that's with the Fish and Wildlife Service. But whatever you do with your own volunteers would be Friends business unless those people are really working as service volunteers. And the line can be hard to distinguish sometimes.
It is very hard to distinguish. And when I brought that agreement to our insurance companies, they told us they would not sell us insurance if we signed that agreement with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So we have no problems with the agreement. But if they'd have one line in there that said the Friends group will not sue the service and the service would not sue the Friends group, then we would be okay with it. The problem is the agreement puts us in harm's way. And if we're going to spend all of our money and our time defending ourselves or buying insurance, then we have no time to spend to develop or help the refuge.
Maybe you need a different insurance company to work with. We've never had that problem.
I'd like to find one that would cover us in the
I think Corfa might have some resources. That is something I don't know, Jackie and Helen. I don't think that we can really deal with that question in this time, can we?
I'll just add one last thing to it, is that the Friends Partnership Agreement is actually reviewed and approved by the Department of Interior Solicitor's Office. And the agreement is meant to be a partnership because we want to work with organizations. And that's the only way that we can work with organizations, you know, with Friends organizations, is to have that. So nobody's, you know, intentionally looking to go out and get their partner and sue them. But I do understand that you have concerns, and some of the ways that Friends can take care of themselves when they have those concerns or they're hosting things, is to make sure that maybe they're carrying general liability insurance, board of directors and officers insurance, event insurance, personal property insurance for their nature store items, or whatever else their insurance agent. But I've never personally heard of any group being turned down by an insurance agent over that agreement.
But
But
Jackie, it looks like oh, sorry, we have two more questions. Looks like Tracy has a question, and then Carissa, and then we'll move on. How's that sound?
Great, thank you. So a quick follow-up question came from my friends group hosting the offsite event. So if the refuge is attending and assisting with the event, so we're invited to the friends group, we go, we help. It's a big fishing event. And we bring some of our volunteers to support with us, then they would be covered under our volunteer service agreement, correct?
I
Yeah,
would,
it sounds like a much more like partnership. So that's probably one of your line items in, you're gonna host the Shorebird Festival, you're gonna host the fishing derby. Even though it's off-site. Yeah, you can bring your own volunteers and have them signed up.
Mhm.
And just delineate, are the friends, really helping you, or are you really helping the friends? But
We're trying to make it so we're more helping the friends because we just don't have the capacity to do this event with our staffing anymore. So our friends group has taken the lead for the last several years, and we are there supporting them.
yep, there's nothing wrong with that, and it should be outlined in the Friends Partnership Agreement that the Friends are hosting this event, the service is going to assist with it. And that covers both service staff and volunteers and assisting with it.
Wonderful, thank you.
Carissa?
Hi, if I may add quickly to the gentleman's question earlier to try to help clarify a little bit from a friends group perspective. He was mentioning about his partnership agreement and signing it. And from my understanding, in the partnership agreement, every year you're supposed to review the partnership agreement on a yearly basis within the 5-year term to make modifications. Every 5 years, you're supposed to renew your partnership agreement and make sure everything's good with it. Now, I know a lot of us across the nation had to renew our partnership agreements depending on where we were with our terms because of the OIG audit. Regarding insurance, there is an area on the partnership agreement that talks about the forms of the insurance that the friends groups carry. With our friends group, we have a general liability, and it talks also that we are supposed to have as additional insured the Fish and Wildlife Service. I believe it's referred to as the Department of Interior, and it specifies the Washington, D.C. address. Now, we have an event that is called the Junior Waterfowl Camp, and part of our requirement with the grant that we get for that is to have Arizona Game and Fish as our additional insured as well for that event. When it comes to our insurances, I forward all of our insurance and certificates to our liaison so they can see that we are in accordance with updating our insurance and holding part, because we are supposed to have, I believe, in some form, insurance in case, let's say we're doing an activity and, I mean, this is just hypothetical, we damage the property or something, and therefore the refuge could file a claim on our insurance. Now, in trying to wrap around my head around a lot of this insurance stuff, when you have events such as your special events, it is determined as to whether you need a special event insurance policy. And in this case, we're going to be doing our 5K walk in January. And so therefore, I've reached out to our insurance agent to get the special event insurance. And the special event insurance is determined if, as the previous lady had mentioned, whether you are hosting the event or helping assist with it. So in this case, it was the friend's idea. Usually that's how it's figured out, is whose idea was it. And so it was our idea to have the event, and therefore it's considered our event. And the Fish and Wildlife Service is helping us with it by providing like water things and stuff like that, but it was our event, so therefore we need the special event insurance. When it comes to volunteer insurance with our friends group, we have figured out that when you create a work day as a volunteer, as a friends group, you have to fill out, it's called the optional form 301A paper that marks you as a group. And the B paper is the signature page for all of the people attending the workday. Now, the Friends group as a group cannot sue the Fish and Wildlife Service because that is in our contract, but the people that are on the signature B page who attend the workday, to my knowledge, are covered under the Tort Claims Act. So if somebody breaks a leg and it is an authorized workday, they could get compensation for a compensation for their injuries. But as the Fringe group, we are not legally allowed to sue the Fish and Wildlife Service. I believe, I'm trying to think of the other thing. Oh, so for the difference between volunteers and Friends group is determining as to if it's a Friends group idea, like we're going to hold a work day for the nature trail cleanup or something. Then in the partnership agreement, it refers to if it's a Friends group thing, then you have to be clearly identified as a Friends group. And in this case, we have reflective jackets that have our letters FOC on the back of the jacket. So it clearly identifies that we're doing this as a Friends group event, not Fish and Wildlife Service. And if it's a Fish and Wildlife volunteer thing, then the Fish and Wildlife Service is to supply a volunteer shirt identifying as you as Fish and Wildlife Service volunteer. So hopefully, I know it's kind of lengthy, but hopefully that helps clarify some of the questions that the other gentleman had.
Yeah, Carissa, we should have hired you to do this presentation. Yeah, very good summary. If it's a Friends event, then you need your insurance. You need to be identified. If it's, a Refuge event, sign up as a volunteer. Even you referenced the right volunteer form as a group. So we appreciate that. Very nicely said. And Rich, you're back. So we're going to let you hop in here.
Great, thanks. Is it audio better?
Yeah.
Yep.
Good. So many friends are afraid of the word lobbying. They're reluctant to do anything that they think constitutes lobbying. And in my past life, before I retired, I was actually a registered lobbyist for a period of time for the National Recreation and Park Association. And I think what would be helpful if you're going to cover this is a definition in some depth of what constitutes allowable activities, allowable lobbying, and what constitutes prohibited activities. Because I think it would go a long way to help satisfy people's fear that they're crossing that line somehow if they talk to a member of Congress or a congressional staff person. What's okay to do and what should you stay away from doing?
And we are going to address some of that in our scenarios that are coming up.
Great.
Thank you.
Jackie, did you want to say anything specific to Rich's comment, or we'll cover it in the scenarios?
I can add one thing right now, Rich. Thank you for bringing that up. 501c3 organizations can do a small percentage of lobbying, as compared to, the big piece of what they do. Lobbying is, kind of a small percent, but they can do it. And so I would say that the Fish and Wildlife Service is probably not going to get real involved telling a Friends group what, kind of defining what lobbying is, because that's really dictated by having your 501c3 status, which is your tax exempt. So IRS is dictating that more than we are.
Yeah, this may be something for a future Corfa webinar or for Corfa to tackle. For those on who don't engage in lobbying, it's okay to say we support a budget for the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we support even a specific budget increase for the Fish and Wildlife Service. It's okay to ask them to support legislation generally for enabling Fish and Wildlife Service to do more or to do it better. There are ways that you can't, that are prohibited really from being, attempting to influence a member of Congress. But I think that the lines, once you understand them, are pretty clear, and Friends can be great advocates. And it's something we at the Friends of Patuxent Research Refuge here in our location near Washington, D.C., we're frequently dealing with members of Congress and congressional staff. And, we've learned how to make those distinctions. And I think when you can, you're not afraid to talk to your members of Congress. You're willing to invite them out to speak freely, but you just need to know and be equipped to do it properly.
Excellent points. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. So Jackie, I'm going to turn it back to you to cover some of our scenarios.
Okay. We're going to go ahead and look at these are kind of some real life scenarios, some things that have actually happened, or at least regional coordinators of the Friends and Volunteer Program. We get these questions. And so we want to just go ahead and have a little fun here. We tried to build them to be fun, but yet they are serious. So let's go to scenario number 1, Sue.
Yes, John, the multitasking partner. Let's help John sort out his friends versus his service volunteer tasks. And let's see the next slide here. So John works one day every week maintaining trails at his local fish hatchery. He also restocks books and other merchandise in the nature store. And he plans to call his congresswoman to lobby for funds to build a larger aquarium and visitor center. So what can John do as a service volunteer, and what can John do as a Friends member? And if you can put some quick answers in the chat, and then we'll have Helen tell us how it's looking. Okay, Carissa's already gotten back to us. I can say that, yes, John can, he can work on the trails and do other work as a service volunteer. But if he's working in the nature store, he is a Friends member. And if he plans to talk to his congresswoman, for sure he's a Friends member. Now, if he meets her visiting the hatchery, he can't outright lobby, but you can certainly be an advocate. We've had that happen. We'll invite congressional reps, staff member out for a tour or what have you, and they're pretty smart. They can ask questions about what the needs are. We can't bring up that, yeah, we need 3 more staff members and X dollars a year more, but if they ask if we have needs, we can tell them about them, and we can certainly show them the place and get them enthused about it. However, if we go to visit them at their office, then we can be a lot more specific, as was already described. And we can only, our limit is 20% of our time or efforts that we can actually lobby. And honestly, I don't know, that would be a lot of time in our case. So I don't know who else has that much lobbying to do, and lobbying, of course, I think was already indicated as being real specific. So, well, this refuge here has a going concern, literally, because they have no toilet paper nor an outhouse. So let's look at this one. So Northern Pintail National Wildlife Refuge has more than 100,000 visitors every year. But the visitor center is 2 miles from the main attraction, which is a nature trail that transects 3 different habitat types. Refuge staff have received complaints from visitors because there's no restroom near the trailhead. The refuge would like to install a vault toilet, but has no funds for it. Refuge staff, friends, and service volunteers have been discussing how they could make the vault toilet a reality. The group is discussing fundraising alternatives. So, which of the following people can be involved in fundraising activities? Friends, service volunteers, service staff? What are some examples of fundraising activities that could be conducted on service property? And what types of fundraising activities must be conducted off service property? We'll give you a minute to put some quick answers in the chat.
Start at the beginning so I can see your answers. Who can be involved in fundraising? Friends, volunteers, staff? Go. Oh, Judy says friends only. Sue says friends. Carissa says friends can participate in fundraising.
That sounds right to me.
Excellent. We got Marcus with some friends. Alyssa. All right. What were some of those examples of fundraising that can be done on service property? Got a donation jar.
Yep,
Love
donation.
that.
Yep, donation boxes is sounds good.
A nature store, excellent.
Yep.
To walk for the wild, there you go. What else can you do at on the refuge? Any other ideas?
Well, potentially they could have some kind of fundraising event, but of course, all of this depends on having these things outlined in their Friends Partnership Agreement. And as our Friends organization knows, if we want to raise over $25,000, we need a separate fundraising agreement for that.
What could you do off service property? Any fun ideas?
Have a raffle, because we can't do that unless you go out in the middle of the street next to the refuge and do your drawing. I don't know. Or an event with like a beer event or something, or wine event.
Yeah, I heard of wine and warblers. I'm not sure if the friends group is on who's done that one, but I've been trying to get our friends group anytime. Wine and warblers. I mean, warblers are included.
Yeah, and I know of some that have worked with a local brewery or winery to have their own label for the wine or branding for the beer for like the fundraising month or time, and that's pretty cool too. That alcohol liability, that is definitely an issue. And when we did have our have a fundraiser in the party room, I guess you'd call it, or event room at a local establishment. We did get insurance policy just for that event. It wasn't very expensive, but it was definitely worth it.
Okay, the thing to know there is that if you're conducting anything that can be seen as gambling, which is somebody's paying for an opportunity to do it, that cannot be done on service property, but friends can definitely do that out in the community or somewhere else.
Very good.
Okay, scenario number 3, who pays the bill? Ouch, when birding, always be sure to watch your step. So in this scenario, Sylvia is leading a bird watching tour during the Shorebird Festival at Sandpiper National Wildlife Refuge. As Sylvia leads her participants along the shoreline of a large wetland, she steps in a hole and breaks her leg. A participant calls the ambulance and Sylvia is transported to the nearest medical facility. So we are going to go through the 3 different cases here and determine who is responsible for paying Sylvia's medical bill if Sylvia is acting as a refuge volunteer. Go ahead and enter in the chat. Who's responsible? You did anything?
Nope.
Nothing? Okay, well, if she's a refuge employee, then the government is responsible for her injuries through the Federal Employee Compensation Act. So she should be covered. How about if Sylvia is really a volunteer? Well, I'm sorry. What if Sylvia is really a friend and she's leading this tour and it's the Friends activity? Anything, Helen?
There's a lot of things popping in, but I think we have a couple conversations.
Yeah,
Let's see. If let's see, Gary says needs to be part of a service agreement if the government's going to pay.
so that would be a service volunteer then, right?
Right. Okay. But yeah, if she's working specifically as a friend for the birding walk, then it should be Friends insurance. We've got in there Friends activity, Friends responsibility. Good, Penny. And Kathy said it shouldn't be a Friends activity.
Yep. And I did notice in the chat too that the question about silent auctions came up. And as far as any silent auction we've had, there was no, buying of a ticket or there was no gambling involved. It was simply going around and putting your bid on the sheet of something you were interested in purchasing. So it was not considered gambling. So.
Correct, because you're not buying a chance to win.
Right.
You're just putting your name down. I'm going to give you $20 for this thing.
And then Kathy, a couple people made a point that if a friend is leading that bird tour, that friend better also be signed up. It's really a problem. If it's on the refuge, the bird tour is on the refuge, that should really be a refuge event, in my opinion anyway, but.
Okay, and if it's a service volunteer that's injured, then again, just like an employee, the Federal Employee Compensation Act should cover that person. Scenario 4. Donating for what? To give or not to give? That is the question. So in this scenario, a visitor enters the aquarium or visitor center at Gavin's Point National Fish Hatchery. After browsing through the exhibits, the visitor sees a donation box and ponders whether or not to make a donation. So the first question is, who is even allowed to put out a donation box in the aquarium or visitor center at a hatchery or refuge? So let's answer that in the chat first.
Already got several answers. Friends can do that.
Okay, so Friends is a correct answer, but so is service staff. So if the project leader or refuge manager is okay with that, the service can also put out a donation box. And any proceeds, if it's a service donation box, those proceeds need to go into a contributed funds account and spent on whatever they're being raised for, which should be identified on the box. If it's the Friends box, there should also be a sign saying what it should be raised for. That goes into the Friends account and should be spent on the activities or programs that it's supporting at the hatchery or the refuge. Second question, well, we kind of answered. How does a visitor know what the donations will be used for? There needs to be a sign there that tells visitors what they're contributing their money toward. And then again, if it's the Friends box, to the Friends account, if it's service box, to the contributed funds account.
Okay, for those groups that have the calendar years, their fiscal year, they are probably thinking along these lines right now. Where do we get candidates? And by golly, we would really like somebody more than just a person with a strong pulse. So our situation. Okay, the Friends of North Shore National Wildlife Refuge are having trouble recruiting members for their board. They joke that all they need is people with a pulse, but they would really like to attract candidates who know and care about the refuge and also have special skills like accounting, fundraising, and using social media. Their area is pretty remote, so candidates are in short supply. Ruth Jones, the new Refuge Biotech, has been very supportive of the Friends, posts photos from the refuge on her Facebook page, and she even joined the Friends. She seems like an energetic, positive person and would also add a younger voice to the board. The nominating committee feels Ruth would be an ideal candidate. How would you advise the committee? First of all, are service employees allowed to serve on the Friends board? Yep, everybody's saying no, and you're absolutely right. There are a lot of other ways you can find candidates within the community, but for sure, don't ask a member of the staff to be on your board. So in what capacities, if any, are service staff allowed to participate in a Friends organization? Advisory,
As advisory.
yep. Like a liaison, yep, or some other expert to help with a project. Yep, liaison. They can help, but I didn't get that.
They can help, but they cannot be a part of the Friends decision-making in internal matters. They can
Right.
be a member. Good point. there.
They can, you know, if there's dues, they can make a contribution to join. And they would be able to participate in membership votes, but only on their own time as a private citizen. Okay, subject expert, provide information. That would be a pretty important role, I think, that they could provide for sure.
All right, Jackie, I think we have time for one more scenario.
Okay, this is a quick one. It's called To Drive or Not to Drive. And you see a nice refuge van here down at Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge. Carl is on the board and serves as the treasurer for the Friends of Trout Lake National Fish Hatchery. While attending the annual meeting, Carl realizes that he left his computer, which has his treasurer's report on it, at home. Since he arrived at the meeting via Uber and he is in a hurry, Carl asks the hatchery manager if he can take the government vehicle that is parked outside the hatchery building to quickly run home and get his computer. First question, enter in the chat. How should the hatchery manager respond and why? Yes or no, and why?
So we've got, must take the defensive driving training from FWS to drive a government rig. That is correct. But to the question, can the manager, or how should the manager respond? No, must have training. Not Fish and Wildlife Service business. It's a liability to allow, misuse of vehicle. So I'm gonna go with Kenai's answer. not just because they're in Alaska, but because no, it's not Fish and Wildlife Service business. So Marcus, you said no, which is also correct. But even with the training, the answer is still no. And why is that, Jackie?
So the answer is no, because the treasurer's report and being on the board for this meeting is all Friends business. It's Friends business, nonprofit, not related to what's going on at the fish hatchery. It's the Friends business, and that's why they cannot operate a government vehicle as a friend. Second question, can a friend ride in a government vehicle?
Got a couple of yes, yes, yes.
So the yeses are looking good. Friends can be passengers in government vehicles when it's for official government business that benefits the government. So you might be thinking, well, you know, being in a friends group, being the treasurer of the nonprofit does benefit the government, and it does. But because that's official business, we say no. But let's say that that friend wanted to join the hatchery manager and ride in the hatchery manager's vehicle to a Chamber of Commerce meeting. And they're going to talk about the hatchery and their partnership, what the friends do. That would be perfectly fine to do that. And you really won't find the answers to questions like this in Friends policy, because it's actually guided by our motor vehicle policy. So if you're service staff on this webinar today, that's where you want to kind of figure out who can operate them, what kind of training do they need to operate, and who can ride in vehicles. Okay, last question. Are there requirements that must be met prior to operating a government vehicle?
We have some resounding yes. We're the government. Why did you say the answer is of course. We're the government.
So we talked earlier about the person operating the vehicle, if they're service staff or if they're a service volunteer, they've got to be at least 18 years old, have a driver's license, take the National Safety Council's defensive driving course, which is 4 hours. They've got to have their signed volunteer service agreement. They've got to have a form called an authorization to operate signed. So those are things that the manager or the supervisor at the site should be having their volunteers and staff sign. Okay, so Helen, you want to forge ahead here, right?
And I don't see any more questions in the chat. We had some conversations back during a fundraising talk. But does anybody have any questions or want to come off mute and ask a question?
So I have a quick question about the fundraising for fundraising on the refuge, if it falls within the money that's raised on a refuge, if it's not part of your membership or nature store on a fundraising effort like an event, wouldn't that money go into a contributed funds account?
So the answer to that is any net profits should go into a contributed funds account and then be spent by the refuge or hatchery on whatever the money was raised for. So there's a lot of times where friends might do an event on the refuge and they might not have any net proceeds. They might just break even. So in that case, you know, there's nothing that has to go to the refuge or hatchery, but it's just the net proceeds.
Can I ask one more question real quick? If you have, for instance, like a walking event and you ask people, have like a donation, but you have them donate money through like Venmo or PayPal Giving Fund, if it's a digital currency, would that still be considered accepting money on the refuge, considering you can ask for money through like maybe memberships and stuff like that digitally, but not exactly physically on the refuge.
Jackie, you're being quiet.
A good one.
The way I have interpreted policy, and again, this is for me, Helen in Alaska, is just like if you can have a donation box, and so if you're having a walk and someone has to physically take their phone, scan the QR code, go through. I don't have any of those other things you were talking about, money apps. But to me, that falls under, they're making a donation. That's no different than pulling out your wallet and putting a 20 in your jar, to me. Now, I don't know, Jackie, if you have a different interpretation, but I feel like if you're saying, if you'd like to donate, that, you're not asking them to pay, there's not a registration fee or anything like that. If I understand your question correct, Carissa?
Yeah, to a certain extent, because I remember there was something along the lines, I can't remember exactly what specific item it was, about receiving money in person versus digital currency, because digital currency would be kind of the loophole of saying that there's no way to prove that it was physically done on the premises. It could have been maybe after the event that somebody decided to donate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. In my opinion, if they went to the event, they were impressed and they wanted to support the refuge. I'm sure it happens at ours a lot, and they can go to our website or another website that's available in Minnesota and give directly to the Friends. And that's, to me, just an outright donation.
The other thing to keep in mind is that there's indirect solicitations for donations, and there's direct solicitations. So indirect is where, hey, there's an opportunity. You can go through our website, you can go through Venmo, you can go through the donation box. You don't have to, but it's there. It's an opportunity for people to donate if they choose to. That's called an indirect donation. Goes to the Friends. Even if it happens on refuge or hatchery property, somebody walks up to you and they say, we want to give $10,000 to the Friends. You didn't solicit them for that donation. They
Right.
just came to you. So that goes to the Friends, total Friends money. It's when you're soliciting on the refuge or hatchery, like you're directly saying it costs you $20 to participate, or it costs you, you have to make this. Even if you're calling it, and if it's an implied donation and you're saying we'd really appreciate $20 a piece, but you don't really have to give anything. But once you say, oh gosh, $20 would be great, that's now a direct solicitation that you made on the service land. And so that gets handled a little differently.
Good distinction, Jackie.
And it gets handled by going to the refuge or hatchery and being put into that contributed funds account. We would rather—
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, we would rather that the Friend, it's going to the Friends account. I mean, either way, it's going to get spent on what it is supposed to be spent on, but it's just a lot easier, and if the Friends can just handle that money.
So Jackie, a couple more questions for you. Can you speak a little bit about Friends doing marketing and social media on behalf of the Fish and Wildlife Service events or activities if they're not sponsored by the Friends group? So I'm assuming they mean, can Friends do that?
Sure hope so.
So I don't see anything wrong with Friends supporting. I mean, Friends are there to support the mission of the site. So even if they're not necessarily involved in an activity that's going to go on the refuge, they can still support it. So I don't really see any issues with that.
And then the next question is, can an event like say a weekend birding festival be a partnership event between the Friends and the service staff, but have a Friends component like a silent auction?
Well, I can answer from our experience. The Refuge has a wildlife festival every year and a spring celebration. And these are really Refuge events, but greatly supported in cash and volunteering as service volunteers by our Friends organization. And we do that all the time. We advertise them. We want to get people out there and enjoy the place and learn about it and support it. And we also have a silent auction with each of those, and it's worked for us. We haven't been arrested yet.
Yeah, and you know, a silent auction can be done on service property too. It's not gambling, anything like that. It's kind of like a donation box. It's an indirect donation. You can try if you want, but there's no pressure for you to bid on that.
So no more questions in the chat. Anybody want to come off mute and ask a question? There's a question. Can we talk about the RV volunteers in the nature store? So there was a prior question that said, did I say, or did we say that service volunteers or RV volunteers should not sell things in the nature store? And that is correct. So Sue.
And can they take their volunteer hat off and put their Friends hat on? I mean, that's what we have had to do. And then you just reduce your volunteer hours by whatever it is, 15 minutes or what have you. And
I agree. We do the same thing. They commit to a certain number of hours of volunteer work that they do for the service. But outside of those hours for the service, they do work in the visitor center. Visitor center, our store and visitor center desk are one and the same. So we figure only about 10% of the time that someone's behind that desk are they actually selling things at the store. The rest of the time they're asking questions or answering questions and, you know, greeting people and those kinds of things. But we do have RV volunteers that work in our store.
good point. And even our nature stores and our learning center where there are no Fish and Wildlife Service offices, but sometimes, you know, it's interminable time because you're not getting many customers, or the people that come in want directions to where can I see this bird, or what do you recommend for hiking trails? So it is a lot of public relations work as well. But since we're in the store, then that's just counting as Friends volunteer time for us. Well, we still have the matrix answers to go through. More questions might come up there.
Okay, if that's it for the chat, we'll move on. So we mentioned this matrix that hopefully you received before the class, but if not, download it when Helen put it in the chat. So Sue and I will just go back and forth on these, and we'll give you the answers, and then we can talk about them afterwards. So who can sign a volunteer service agreement? That is strictly a person who is acting as a service volunteer.
And as we've already discussed, soliciting funds on behalf of a refuge or hatchery, only a Friends member can do that.
Who can use office or storage space in a service facility? You might have a Friends organization that has office space, a service volunteer with it, and of course the employees also do.
And donation boxes, we've already talked about who can place a donation box in a visitor center. It could be a Friends member, as well, as long as the box is labeled. Could be a service employee if the manager has given permission.
Participation in community outreach events can be done by any of the three.
Right. Conducting law enforcement activities. Well, thank goodness that's only up to a service volunteer.
Service employee.
Or, yeah, employee, I mean, geez.
Yeah.
And only the LE people.
Develop or deliver educational programs can be done by any of the three.
Right. And I think that, you know, people need to be, I know Kathy Woodward asked about this. You need to be really clear about who you're really doing it for, because you might really be a service volunteer, even though you're a very active friend. Okay, so who can receive a monetary award as a form of recognition for volunteering from the service site? And that's a service volunteer. And I don't know, Jackie, if we gave any details about that, but that's kind of an interesting one if people have questions. I don't know.
Service volunteers can actually be given up to $1,500 per year as an award. Generally, an award that large, that's not given out too often. I mean, it had to be like some tremendous something was accomplished, that it's usually something pretty big if it's that amount. There's a lot of $500, $600 awards that go out to volunteers or more. But the one thing that, if you're service staff, the one thing you want to be really careful about is you should talk to your volunteers before you give them these awards, because anything $600 and over is going to trigger them to receive a 1099, a form 1099. And, you know, we just want them to be okay with that it will, you know, look like income when they report their taxes. Okay, next one, lobby Congress to support service programs. The only one of the three that can do that is a Friends member.
Right. And selling items in a nature store, we've kind of maybe beaten that one to death, only a Friends member.
And supervision of volunteers can be done only by service employees. That does not mean that a Friends group, or, you know, it doesn't mean that they can't coordinate work. We do have some Friends partnership agreements that do say that Friends will kind of coordinate the day-to-day activities of service volunteers. And that is fine, but they don't supervise them.
Right, and biological monitoring. Everybody, again, can do that.
Selling federal or junior duck stamps is all free. Duck stamps can be sold. There's usually a collection officer that's doing the selling, if it's the volunteer or the employee. And Friends can sell them in their nature store. And we do have a consignment, a consigner in Texas where the Friends can get the duck stamps and sell what they can and return the rest, so that they're not having to pay for something that doesn't sell.
Right. Yeah, I think we do the same thing. Helen, I noticed a couple things in the chat. Are those things that we should share out, or can we continue for now?
Yeah, I think you can continue.
Okay. Who can report time as service volunteer hours? Well, a service volunteer.
Conduct a raffle or other gambling activity off service property to support the service. Only a Friends member can do that.
And the same thing with administering a Friends organization, only a Friends member.
Who can attend training courses sponsored by NCTC? Those are actually available to Friends, volunteers, and service employees. So if you're a friend on this call, or sometimes act as a volunteer, definitely talk to your supervisor at your station or your liaison at your station, so that you can find out what kinds of training courses are out there.
And we have already discussed who can operate a service vehicle. That would be a service volunteer or a service employee.
Writing bylaws or filing articles of incorporation is definitely only Friends work.
And that's whoever you could talk into it. Who can wear uniform components with official service volunteer logo on them? And that would be a service volunteer.
Serve on a Friends board of directors is for a Friends member.
And who can collect fees owed to the government? That is non-recreation fees, and that would be a service employee. So if we don't have any other questions, we kind of want to do a wrap. And just a summary, obviously, the Friends have a partnership agreement with the Fish and Wildlife Service. They're a nonprofit 501c3 organization. They can lobby, not on the Refuge, and they can solicit donations and they can do fundraising. And volunteers, of course, need their volunteer service agreement. And this is a nice thing too. You can earn in America the beautiful volunteer pass. But I should add that we had a volunteer that gave his pass to one of his employees because they're going on a trip out west, and they got quizzed and they tried to get in the park about what their volunteer work was and where they got the pass, and they were in trouble. So just as an aside. And again, as Jackie just explained, volunteers are eligible to get that monetary reward, and all the contributed hours go into the station reports. So there are things that both Friends and volunteers can do, like community outreach, and we can share office space or have office space at the service site. And again, like volunteers, Friends can sign a volunteer service agreement and volunteer at their site. There are many similarities, and we know that both Friends and volunteers are dedicated to their hatchery or refuge, and Friends and service volunteers are really some of the service's best supporters and advocates. And I know at our refuge, if we didn't have the Friends, a lot of work wouldn't get done, or a lot of programs wouldn't be offered because of funding or lack of staff. So we know we're very much appreciated. So I don't know, want to make any comments otherwise, Jackie, or then we can show them our contact list on the last page.
We do have Carissa's hand up, and then Rich asked the question if we could share the filled in matrix. And I think Eden can share that out when she shares the recording.
Right.
So yes to that. As you can see, here are the contacts for your specific regions. And let's see. So Carissa, do you want to ask your question? And then Rich has a question in the chat as well.
So this is a question that I really don't know the answer. Not like I ask questions I know answers to, but at our refuge, we have a hunt draw process for an area, and it consumes a lot of hours to do it. And at one point in time, there was a fee for it, but there's no fee now. Is that something that a Friends group could do in helping out, is like take over in assisting, like to do the draw and notify people for it as like a Friends activity and assisting the refuge, because Friends groups can help refuge and stuff, and then be able to generate like for like an application fee, put that into a contributed funds account? Or is that like a no? Does that make sense at all, or no?
Where does so people are like basically paying for a license, but it's a lottery, so they may be chosen or not, right?
Right. So we used to have it where it was through the refuge used to have it where it was through a system and you would pay like an application fee. And then they did away with that because the system kept messing it up. So now it's a free application to apply for a draw date for a reservation. And so I'm just trying to look at ways of being able to bring in revenue for the Fish and Wildlife Service while maybe trying to help free up some of the employees' times.
So I think if you're kind of taking care of the paperwork end of it, but when it comes to collecting any money, Friends can't collect any money for the government with the exception of like duck stamps and rec fees. So like if somebody gets drawn or they get to have the license and hunt and now they have to pay $50, I don't think that can technically be going to the Friends group and then put into a contributed funds account, because that would be like you're collecting the fee for the government.
Okay, so you couldn't make it like it's like a processing thing of the application. Not, I mean, you know, like if you have 100 people put in an application, that all 100 people, regardless if they get chosen or not.
So you're saying then it's just an application fee?
Right.
I would probably leave that to project leader discretion as to whether that counts as collecting for the government or it's just enough.
I'm thinking we probably might need to maybe close out, but let people hang out if they want. I'm not sure. We've kind of run out of time, y'all. So I think what we should do is say thank you to our team of experts. You have their contact information, and I think the best thing would be to maybe engage them independently, person to person, if you want to ask more questions. This has been a terrific day of terrific webinar, and I can't thank Helen and Jackie and Sue Hicks enough to present their ideas today. But I think we'll have to draw the line and say goodbye for today, and then we'll see you again next month, December 13th at 2 p.m., and we'll be talking about diversity. Thanks to everybody attending today. You gave us some great ideas for some future webinars, and we look forward to seeing you in a month. Thank you, everybody.